did the opposite, and then some. Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke wrote the screenplay and novel simultaneously, feeding each other ideas like creative parasites. Clarke would write a chapter, Kubrick would change the story, then Clarke would rewrite everything. They worked together for 4 years in this literary PBM in the alphabet. Clever, right? Completely false. Arthur C. Clarke repeatedly denied it, calling it total nonsense. HAL stood for heuristically programmed algorithmic computer. He spent decades explaining it wasn't a code or corporate dig, just acronym coincidence. That everyone believed the conspiracy probably bothered him more than any computer malfunction ever could. Sometimes the most obvious explanation is the boring one, even in Kubrick's universe. 3. The dawn of man had no dawn. Those opening ape sequences weren't filmed in Africa. They weren't even filmed outside. Kubrick built the entire prehistoric world on a soundstage in England, complete with artificial rocks, painted backdrops, and studio lighting masquerading as ancient sun. The apes were dancers and mimes in costumes, choreographed like a brutal ballet. Stuart Freeborn, the makeup artist, spent months perfecting each ape mask, making them expressive enough to convey the birth of human intelligence without words. The irony was perfect. The most primal, raw sequence in cinema history was completely artificial. Man's evolutionary leap, manufactured under fluorescent lights in suburban London. The dawn of humanity, filmed in the dead of English winter. The Stargate sequence nearly killed the movie. 20 minutes of pure visual madness, swirling colors, impossible landscapes, cosmic birth and death compressed into a kaleidoscope nightmare. The Stargate sequence took 18 months to create and nearly bankrupted the production. Kubrick hired dozens of artists to paint abstract canvases, then filmed them through colored filters, rotating prisms, and custom lenses. He shot thousands of feet of chemical reactions, oil patterns, and light refractions. The team worked without computers, using only optical effects and mechanical wizardry. Many crew members quit, calling it impossible. Others had nervous breakdowns trying to match Kubrick's impossible vision. The result was either genius or torture. Audiences are still deciding 50 years later. 5. Dalia thought he was in a horror movie. Dave Bowman's actor knew almost nothing about the plot. Kubrick kept the script so secretive that Dalia spent most of filming confused about his own character's journey. He thought HAL was the hero and the humans were invaders. The famous Dave scenes were shot without context. Dalia responding to Douglas Rain's voice recordings with no idea why his computer was becoming homicidal. This confusion actually worked. His bewilderment feels authentic because it was. Dalia's performance captures genuine human helplessness against incomprehensible forces. He wasn't acting lost in space. He was genuinely lost in Kubrick's maze of secrecy. Sometimes the best performances come from actors who have no idea what they're really doing. The monolith was plywood painted black. The most mysterious object in cinema history was a sheet of painted wood. 4 feet by 9 feet by 20 inches. Simple geometric perfection hiding behind theatrical smoke and mirrors. The prop department built several versions, one for close-ups, one for the ape scenes, miniatures for space sequences. Each one was just plywood covered in black paint, buffed to impossible smoothness. But under Kubrick's lighting, it became alien architecture, a doorway to infinity. The simplicity was intentional. No buttons, screens, or obvious technology. Just pure geometric form that could represent anything. God, evolution, alien intelligence, or humanity's next step. The ultimate cinematic MacGuffin built for under $50. 7. Douglas Rain never expected to be Hal. The voice that chilled generations wasn't Kubrick's first choice. Martin Balsam recorded all of HAL's dialogue first, but his performance was too emotional, too obviously villainous. Kubrick wanted something scarier, artificial intelligence that sounded reasonable while planning murder. Enter Douglas Rain, a Canadian Shakespearean actor with perfect diction and zero emotion. Tone made Hal's betrayal more disturbing than any screaming villain. The most human character in the film was voiced by someone who never saw it being made. 8. Kubrick destroyed the models. After filming every spacecraft, every space station, every detailed miniature, Kubrick ordered them destroyed after filming Wrapped. These weren't cheap props, they were masterpieces of practical effects, built by teams of craftsmen over months. The Discovery 1 model was 54 feet long and cost more than most houses. But Kubrick was paranoid about other filmmakers copying his designs or using them in cheaper sci-fi movies. So he had everything smashed, burned, or thrown away. Today, those models would be worth millions, displayed in museums or private collections. Instead, they exist only on film, preserved in 70mm glory, but lost forever in 3 dimensions. The ultimate act of artistic control, destroying your creations to preserve their uniqueness. 9. The Blue Danube Waltz wasn't Kubrick's idea. The most famous marriage of music and visuals in cinema, space stations waltzing to Strauss, almost never happened. Kubrick originally commissioned a full orchestral score from composer Alex North, who spent months creating original music for every scene. But during editing, Kubrick fell in love with the classical pieces he'd been using as temporary tracks. He scrapped North's entire score without telling him. North showed up to the premiere expecting to hear his music and instead watched spaceships dancing to 19th century waltzes. He was devastated. The decision was brutal, but brilliant. The classical music made space travel feel both majestic and ironic. Technology moving to the rhythms of old Earth culture. The spinning set made everyone sick. The Discovery 1 centrifuge, that giant hamster wheel where astronauts jogged in artificial gravity, was real and actually rotated. Kubrick built a 38-foot diameter wheel that spun at 3 miles per hour, with cameras mounted inside to capture the effect. Actors had to time their movements perfectly as the set rotated around them. The crew got motion sickness watching through viewfinders that spun continuously. Keir Dalia and Gary Lockwood spent hours running inside this mechanical nightmare, fighting nausea and disorientation. The irony was perfect. A machine designed to simulate comfortable space travel that made everyone on Earth feel terrible. But the effect was flawless. Audiences believed in artificial gravity because the actors genuinely experienced it, even if it made them want to vomit. 11. The movie premiered to confused walkouts. At the 1968 premiere, 241 people walked out. Rock Hudson reportedly asked, "Will someone tell me what the hell this is about?" Critics called it pretentious, boring, incomprehensible. Major studios worried they'd funded a beautiful disaster. But something strange happened in the following weeks. Audiences started returning, bringing friends, staying for multiple viewings. College students adopted it as a psychedelic experience. The film that confused Hollywood became a cultural phenomenon. What looked like failure was actually evolution. Audiences needed time to understand what Kubrick had created. The walkouts weren't rejection. They were the first step in a long conversation between filmmaker and audience that continues today. Sometimes the best art takes time to find its people. 12th, Hal's death scene made grown men cry. The most emotional moment in the film wasn't human. It was a computer slowly dying. As Dave disconnects Hal's memory banks, the AI regresses through its programming, becoming childlike, frightened, finally singing Daisy Bell in a slowing, distorted voice. Douglas Rain's performance broke hearts worldwide. Audiences felt sympathy for a machine that had just committed murder, proving Kubrick's point about technology and humanity. The scene was even more powerful because HAL seemed more alive than most of the human characters. 13. The bone-to-spaceship cut. Took 6 months to perfect the most famous match cut in cinema history, an ape's bone transforming into a nuclear satellite across 4 million years. Looks effortless. It wasn't. Mimes and movement artists. People trained in grace and expression, not aggression. Many were vegetarians who felt uncomfortable simulating the discovery of meat consumption. They spent weeks learning to move like early hominids, studying primate behavior at London Zoo. 2001: A Space Odyssey didn't just predict the future, it created it. From Hal's voice assistants to spinning space stations, Kubrick's vision became our reality. But the real prophecy was about cinema itself, that movies could be more than entertainment. They could be philosophy, poetry, and pure visual experience. 50 years later, we're still trying to catch up to what Stanley saw in the stars.